Welcome, everybody. My name's Jason Gillam with Secure Ideas, and today we have a really, really cool session, I think. One of my favorite topics, we're going to be talking about tools. So the Flipper Zero is a hacking multi-tool, and for this we have two of our senior consultants, Travis Phillips and Jennifer Shannon. So I will just hand it straight over to them because they have this full presentation with lots of cool demos and stuff. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. So, yes, we're going to talk about the Flipper Zero. You may have heard of it, maybe not. We'll be going over that a little bit, but it's made some waves in the news, and there's been a lot of like TikTok videos, YouTube videos, and just news articles in general about it. Either way, I thought we'd take some time, try to look over some of the good, the bad, and the ugly in the news, and then just say, you know what? That's all good and well, and that can make some impressions, but let's just stop and take a look at this from the perspective of a hacker. And to show you what an awesome multi-tool this is, I've actually got the Flipper Zero actually hooked up to my computer, and I'm going to be using it as my PowerPoint presentation remote for controlling the slideshow. So the Flipper Zero is basically this small little piece of hardware that you see here. And the Flipper Zero from their website describe it as it's a small little portable multi-tool for penetration testers, geeks, and a toy-like body. It was designed to kind of emulate the old Tamagotchi toys, little digital pets. But overall, it comes with a ton of hardware packed inside of it. And this is what makes it really great, in my opinion. So it's this small little body, but we've got a screen, we've got buttons, we've got a ARM processor inside of here, and batteries. We've got all sorts of stuff. So like we'll be going into that in a little bit more depth, but it's like a completely self-contained device. The battery life on it's amazing, and so much stuff that you can actually do with this thing, and it makes it a great platform. Like out of the box, it's a very good system. And it can also be hacked upon and expanded upon for research purposes and stuff like that, which makes it fantastic. Very user-friendly package for things. Does it also come with cat ears? Jen, that's your question.
So actually, I think I had the flipper before I had the cat ears. So fun fact, the cat ears were actually purchased for me by Secure Ideas when I first started here. So Secure Ideas comes with the cat ears.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, you were one of the, what is that stuff called? Kickstarter backers?
Yeah, I was one of the original backers for the Flipper Zero.
I'm late to the game, but I dove into it. So, but anyways, we'll go ahead and just kind of transition here and start talking about some of the news stories. Start with the good. This was an article from TechCrunch. The Flipper Zero was on track to make about $80 million in sales, which these devices sell for about 170. So do the math. That is a lot of units moved, and that's actually really impressive, just like from a commercial success standpoint. And also just shows you there's a lot of demand for these little guys. So they're very cool. Another one that I thought was kind of neat was, I'm a fan of Linus Tech Tips on YouTube, and he actually did a review of the Flipper Zero after it had kind of started making some waves on YouTube as well as TikTok. And I think he did a really good comprehensive overview of it, talking about the some of the good, the bad in the news and stuff like that. And even kind of looked over some interesting use cases for it and was pointing out some of the things ultimately leading to a question of, so is this a thing that should actually exist and be for sale? And his conclusion was, I think yes. And he's like, even though like you can see some people doing things like changing gas station signs and yada yada with it, is it really that bad for that to be happening because it shows a vulnerability in a rather benign way, as opposed to waiting for an actual threat actor to do these sort of things? I think that's kind of good. Like in my opinion, it's like the same thing. You had kids that were like licking ice cream at the store and putting it back on the shelf. Okay, it's kind of silly, but Yeah, great. Better question here. Why weren't there tamper seals on the ice cream to begin with? So yeah, that was like it was a pretty good one that's worth watching.
I'm pretty sure Ariana Grande was the donuts.
Yeah, but we can start to get into some of the bad. The Flipper Zero was also banned for sale on Amazon for being a card skimmer device, which, as far as I can tell, it's not really viable for that. And if you wanted a card skimmer, you'd
There's
be
more
much better
effective.
just buying a actual card skimmer. So it didn't work with that, but it was actually kind of interesting because I'd actually never read some of these seller terms and conditions. And the card skimmers are right there next to the lockpicks, which is really funny because you can still buy lockpicks if you just search for lockpicks on Amazon. But yeah, this is like one of the things that was like early days started kind of coming up with it. And then we started seeing things like this, that's a screenshot from a news article, but Brazil refused to allow these things. I saw it on sale for Amazon. I don't know if they're allowed on sale again or not on Amazon. And either way, my recommendation would be to just buy it from the Flipper site. That way, you're getting something that's good and you're not dealing with scalpers or scammers or anything. But anyways, the Brazil port authorities were actually intercepting shipments of these things and redirecting them to their telecommunications bureau, claiming that they had not been certified by their authorities. Kind of like how here in the U.S. we have FTC. They have something like that, and they were not certified with that, and they kind of were like not allowing them to get certified. Like any inquiries would just result in no response, so forth. And we also had this here in the U.S. They seized them at customs and went, "These are Russian hacking devices," and we're holding them, like basically just kind of holding the shipment for a while. They eventually, I think, let those go through, but you get the gist of it.
I don't know if anybody here was an early backer like I was, but I'd backed it so long before it actually came out that I almost forgot about it for a while because I was like one of the first adopters of it. But they ended up being delayed for like 2 years because they had certification at one point, and then there was pushback, and they had to re-go for the certification again. So they've had a lot of issues with maintaining or getting certification for some of the stuff that it does.
Yeah, and like their supply chain has improved a lot. Like whenever I ordered mine, I'm late to the game. I've only had mine for a few months now, but I really deep dove into it. But either way, it was shipped from the U.S. So apparently they're getting them here into the States and then shipping them internally to not deal with those sort of logistics problems. So, and then this kind of covers like some of the bad, and then we can get into the ugly. And a dude on YouTube posted a video where he was allegedly using the Flipper Zero to smoke a smart multimeter, or not a multimeter, but a power meter. Just sending some random radio signals to it. Cutaway News or Cutaway Security did a blog post on this that was really good, and Reverse Engineering News did a pretty good breakdown of it. But they basically found out that there was a brand manufacturer on there, or like for the utilities company that services the Illinois area. And this guy that posted the original video had also done a demo and accidentally doxed himself where he was doing a demo of a GPS module for the Flipper Zero, and it showed his longitude, latitude for his backyard. He lives in Canada. So he's outside of the service area for this thing. And so, but you can buy these on eBay, these power meters. So like they did a breakdown on it. It's like, yeah, so basically we think this thing was staged. But either way, they were pointing out, it's like, it's not really good when people do this sort of stuff, and it can lead to some really bad things, which is actually hilarious because I was watching Reverse Engineering News. Hash was actually had another story. Apparently, the New York Police Department's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau released a notice about the Flipper Zero with concerns that racially and ethically motivated violent extremists are interested in the Flipper Zero because it can be used to like unlock doors, unlock gates, and Oh yes, attack power stations, which they've been known to do. So it's one of those things that you can kind of see where news stories start to lead towards decision making in like law enforcement, lawmaking, that sort of thing. So not great, but either way, we're not interested in that sort of stuff. We're going to talk about it. What is it to us? Me and Jen, we're just penetration testers here and just geeks. So if we remove the news from all this, what do we have? Quite a multi-tool. I love this thing. It appealed to me both as a geek and as a nerd. Unlike Jen, I did not kickstart it because I don't buy promises, I buy products. So I needed to make sure that it would actually go to market. So never just. Not sure. Anyways.
The black case? No, I actually ended up with one with the orange cases because I think the black ones were maybe
Got Founders Edition or something?
No, whenever you did it, you could do a you could opt in to be one of their testers, basically. So you would get like a the tool, and you had to give like feedback on it. So like I didn't opt to do that. I wanted my finished one to have working buttons and no issues like that. And I think those who opted into that got the black ones. But they did ask me which color I want, and I think that I have an orange case.
Okay. So like mine's a regular white one that they sell now with the orange silicone case on it. It seems pretty durable. I don't know that the silicone cases need it, but in my opinion, why not? So I thought this thing was really cool. It appealed to me. And we have quite a community here. I'm out of Jacksonville, Florida, where we're headquartered. We have quite a community for InfoSec, and like the amount of people that like have these, and like I've talked to them and start telling them about the experiments and stuff that I'm doing. Their experiments were so much different, and like the amount of use cases that people have found for these things and what they're using them for is awesome. Like, and like I thought that would just make an interesting webcast in and of itself. And I was like, just talking to Jennifer, me and her have used them for very different things. So like if we take into account like what are we looking at here, we have an open source firmware on this device. You can download the firmware and modify it. People are contributing to it all the time and forking it off and making other variants of firmware for this thing. The documentation is incredible. It is a digital pet. It is a bit basic compared to a Tamagotchi, but it's still kind of neat and fun. Like it levels up as you do stuff, so that's fun. There are desktop and mobile applications that are companion applications for it that just do fantastic. And like really well done. We'll go over that in a little bit. But it also comes with like GPIO pins here on the top, which we'll go into that a little bit when I kind of talk about some of my use cases. It's got USB, which is used for charging data transfer RPC. It can also be used for rubber ducky attacks and all sorts of other things. And like you can see right now, I'm using it as a presenter control over USB. It also has U2F. I'm not sure that I would recommend that. Even the documentation's a little like, hey, just so you're aware, this is purely a software implementation. And the other problem is that the Flipper Zero does have a SD card slot that you can use for storage. Your certificates are stored on that SD card, and there's no way to encrypt the SD card. So if your Flipper Zero ever got stolen, you're going to have a bad day. And then it's got an assortment of transceivers. So we got sub-gigahertz transceivers, which gives you like the 443 megahertz range for various radio devices, 315, etc. 125 kilohertz, which is your common RFID tags and cards. And then you got NFC, which are also common cards, common devices, like anything that usually you use your phone for tap and go sort of stuff, that sort of stuff. And then there's also an infrared transceiver, which I love that feature because like I've programmed almost all of my IR remotes into this thing, and it just like I'm lazy and I'll just pick this thing up and use it. And that actually helps keep my flipper happy. So we'll go ahead and just start diving into some of this stuff. The software is awesome. So when they designed this thing in the firmware, they created an RPC protocol that can work over Bluetooth or USB. And you can plug this into the desktop application available on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And that would be the one on the right there. And that was written in Qt. And I develop a lot in Qt. And I got to say, this UI is beautiful. And like, I really want to like really dive into the code to just take notes, because like that is a beautiful application. It allows you to like manage your firmware and stuff like that. You can also upload and download files from the SD card. And it also kind of has like on both the mobile as well as the desktop application, like support for kind of like an RDP style remote control. So you can actually see the screen on the device from the software and then also send inputs to the device as well. The mobile application has support where you can connect to your device over Bluetooth, and there's actually some really cool stuff that can happen as a result of that. So, for example, on top of just being able to remote control it, you can also like have it pull down sample files that you've captured, store them, and then you can launch a replay from that. So, like if you had a sub-gigahertz control file that like would ring a doorbell, I can literally just have this thing in my pocket and launch that attack from my phone without ever having to pull this out of my pocket, and it's just a transceiver at that point. Because this, not very subtle, but somebody sitting around playing on their cell phone, that's everyone. It doesn't really narrow it down. So that's kind of cool. And one other attack that really, in my opinion, makes the mobile software interesting is this thing is capable of rubber ducky attacks where you can plug it into USB and you can have it auto fire, or you can have it set up so you'd have to click the center button to launch the payload. What's cool about that is that you could plug this into a computer while it's locked and somebody's away from their desk, have it in the configuration where it needs to have the button pressed, just tuck it behind their tower, wait for them to come back and unlock their computer, and when they're distracted, launch it remotely from your phone. So that's actually a really powerful attack as well. And then there was also some offloading, like for example, one of the attacks where you would attack the card reader for MyFair would actually offload some of that processing onto your phone. It would just capture samples, send them back to your phone, and your phone has a better processor and memory than the device does. Offload some of the computational work and just let this thing focus on capturing samples and sending it back. So, and then, yeah, it was pretty cool. So like, there are a bunch of firmwares out there. Like I said, it's open source. So we ended up with quite a few firmwares. We have the factory firmware, which is vanilla. I tried to roll with that for as long as I could. And I wanted to see where the limitations were. And I got quite far with it. It was super easy to update because either the mobile application or the desktop application could be used to upload, do the update on the firmware. And overall, like I was looking at the other firmwares and I'm like, all of these seem like a lot of the functionality and capability here seems to be in asset files and what are known as FAPs. A FAP is a flipper application. It's basically an ELF file that contains all the assets bundled in with it that would be necessary for the application to run. The FAPs you can build if you download and clone the Git repo. The Git repo would actually contain a tool called FBT. FBT is the tool, the Flipper build tool, and you can use that to build any FAPs that you want. And then you can just throw those onto the SD card. There'll be a single file with a .fap extension. And you'd put those underneath the apps folder, and then you can find them on your Flipper device and just launch them. So that's how you'd effectively install apps. That's how that used to have to be done whenever I was using it. I had not had a chance to test it, but in the mobile app, they just recently released the FAP store, which will allow you to directly download FAPs on your phone and have it sent over the Bluetooth protocol to the device, and you can keep your devices updated that way. So I think that's a really neat thing, and that actually is going to add a lot of power to the vanilla firmware. The next one that came along was kind of Unleashed. So when you get this thing, you follow the quick start guide. It tells you have to do the firmware update before you can start using any of the radio features. And the reason for that was it would do a region lock on the device and block you from doing transmissions on channels that legally you're not supposed to be doing in your country. The Unleashed firmware would remove that restriction. So, I say really there's no need for that, but Rogue Master, that's the one that Jen's been running. That one was like a DBZ and anime themed one that had the unlocked feature and then also threw everything in the kitchen sink into this firmware. So like all of the custom FAPs that were out there were installed there. They also went online. They found like a bunch of asset packs where people had like sub gigahertz captures, IR captures and stuff like that, and just preload those onto the firmware image. And then custom animations, like I said, that were kind of DBZ and anime themed. And it just kind of made it a neat experience. Another one that was pretty popular is Squashware. Squashware is this Sasquatch themed, and it gives you a lot of the features of the Rogue Master, but it maintains the region lock. Because that was like one of the concerns, like, okay, but I don't want this thing to do any illegal transmissions. I'd like to actually keep the region lock intact. So that was a good one for that, and it has like Sasquatch themed animations and whatnot on it. And then the one that actually made me jump ship off of the factory was the Extreme firmware. And that's what I'm still currently running. So it's very similar to the Rogue Master, but it has some nice additions. And the main one that sold me to make the jump was the Bad USB app was replaced with Bad KB. And the Bad USB FAP is the one that is used for facilitating the rubber ducky attacks. And normally that was like you plug it in and it could just act as a keyboard and run. This one would also allow you to do that not just with USB, but with Bluetooth. So it actually was pretty cool because of that. And you could do Bluetooth or USB, and it would allow you to spoof either as well. So with Bluetooth, you had the ability to spoof the name, the MAC address, and a few other things. And then the USB, you could actually spoof the vendor ID and product ID of the USB connection. So some pretty cool things that came from there. The developer of that, I believe, Clara Crazy is her name, but she actually did a lot of UI rework that I thought was really nice. So like if you pressed up, that would normally bring up like quick settings, and on the factory firmware, it just had like lock, dummy mode, and something else. This now, it almost acts like a cell phone pull down drawer for settings, and you've got like Bluetooth lock. You've actually got sliders for like backlight brightness and sound. You had the ability to flip it to left-hand mode, which just kind of inverts the screen. Dark mode, which would invert the color scheme. She also provides an extreme settings, which has settings that are specifically unique to the firmware. And there's a quick launch to that, as well as the original settings that is the normal flipper settings. And that has been incredibly useful. You can also change the application menu instead of just being a list to being like a Wii grid menu, where it's like tiles, and you can actually add and customize that however you want, which is kind of nice. So like normally when you install FAPs, you'd have to go to like apps and then like go down like the directory structure. You could actually take one of those and be like, no, I want a tile for that on the main launcher. So that was pretty cool. That was very nice, and like it also supported developed support for what are called asset packs, which is the UI and theming. So this one was a little bit weird. When she started it off, it was kind of like a not safe for work theme, and I did not know this, but GitHub can apparently age restrict your GitHub repo, and you couldn't go to her repo without being signed in to GitHub. And that was because there was not safe for work animation files that were included in the firmware. She decided, hey, how about I actually just strip those out? We just go with the default Flipper animations, and then I'll put those on a separate site, and you can download them if you want. And oh yes, other people can also contribute asset packs to it, and you can theme this thing however you want. And that actually worked out really well. So, yeah, that was pretty cool. So, our experience with it, like I said, Jen and I have had two very different experiences with it. Now, mine, I spent most of my time on that factory firmware and then switched to the flipper. I've been pretty happy with, the extreme firmware, and I've been pretty happy with that one. I'm still running that one. I think I'll probably be on that one for a while. I do kind of want to switch back to the original factory and give it a shot, especially with all the new functionality that comes with the FAP store on the mobile app. But my experiences with it, I mostly do like a lot of like playing around with hardware hacking, and I've done some like RF attacks and replays and stuff like that, and playing with the rubber ducky. That's been my favorite thing. But talking to Jen, she gets involved in a lot of physical penetration testing, and she's used it for attacking like card readers and stuff like that, and doing like other tasks with like physical penetration testing. So we kind of wanted to cover like some of our use cases, and we're going to keep this fairly high level. There will be future webcasts where I'll do one and Jen will do one, and that's where we'll get into the weeds on some of this stuff. But like right now, it's just kind of a high level look at all this weird stuff that you can do with the flipper besides just using it as a presentation remote. So one of the first experiments that I did with it, because like I was like, okay, I want to play with some of this hardware stuff. Like we got GPIO pins, and I noticed there was an app on there that was like USB to UART bridge. I'm like, wait, really? So yes, actually, you can plug it into your computer via a USB connection, and then on the top there's some pinouts, and you'll have pin number 13 and 14 are TX and RX, and then you've got a ground pin. I was able to connect that up to a little like pogo plug PCB, and that provided me with an actual UART connection that I was able to use my computer with screen to drop into a shell on that little hardware device. Just using screen. And I was like, this is pretty cool because I have a USB to UART bridge, and this thing actually trumps it in my opinion, because the other little one I have is like a little AliExpress board, and it's just a bare naked PCB with some pins, pin headers, and like whatnot. Okay, this is better because this actually has a case. And I don't have this stashed away in some weird storage system, because if you get into hardware hacking, you do collect a lot of things and you need to get organized. So the next thing that I did with it is I noticed that there was an SPI memory manager, and I was like, hold up, that sounds really fun. Are you telling me I can dump SPI flash with this thing? And the answer is yes, you can. SPI flash is typically used for BIOS chips, by the way, on the motherboard. If you got an old motherboard laying around, you want to play with that, you can kind of probably target that. But I was looking at it in the application, that screenshot that's there on the screen now, that is actually built into the application for the SPI mem manager. It tells you what the wiring diagram is. And like, I really think that's nice that that's just in there and you don't have to pull out your phone and look it up on the internet. So I do appreciate that. But as we were doing this, you'll notice with this wiring diagram, pin number 9 goes to pin number 8, 7, pin number 3, and also pin number 1. So you got one pin that needs to go to 4 pins on the chip. And on pin number 1, it actually needs to go through a 10K ohm resistor. And it's just like, okay, that's cool and all, except in the real world, that's what that wiring is going to look like. You're going to have to get a breadboard to expand one pin out to 4, and you're also going to need one pin that has a resistor. Okay, it's not very pretty. It's also not quick to wire up. You need to pull out a breadboard, a bunch of jumper cables or jumper wires, and a 10K ohm resistor every time I want to dump a flash. Not the quickest and easiest implementation, but I got to thinking, this project did have pretty good documentation. One of the things that you came across in the documentation was they had a technical drawing for how external modules should be designed. And using this, I was actually able to design my own PCB that just handled the wiring of it. Yeah, Jennifer's got one right there. So I just drew this up in CAD real quick one night and sent it off, and it was like, hey, to JLC PCB. It was like, all right, what would it cost to make 25 of these? And it was like about $10.96 shipped. Sold. So I made these, and these are pretty awesome because now all you got to do whenever you want to dump an SPI flash, just plug that into the top. It breaks out into a test clip that you can actually just clip onto the SPI flash chip, and then you can just use the software to create a dump of whatever's on there. You can also use that to write a bit.bin file to a flash chip, verify what's on the flash chip matches a .bin file, or just erase a flash chip. Did I lose connection here?
I can still hear you.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, I thought this was a really cool feature. Like I said, this documentation back here, I didn't like. With the documentation was good enough that this worked on the first shot. I was like, I've checked all the measurements. Like it's like one of those things, you cut twice, or I'm sorry, measure twice, cut twice. It's the joke. It's always one of those. No matter how much you try, your first attempt's probably not going to work, right? It actually did. So that documentation was good enough. But wait, there's more. It can also act as an ABR programmer. So for the ETMIL, or as it's known now, microchips, ET Mega, ET Tiny series of microcontrollers. This thing actually would work as a in-system programmer. And I had an old CTF challenge board that I got from Raytheon some time ago that was powered by an ET Mega microcontroller. And I was actually able to use this. Now, the software had, and I hadn't tested it since, but I should probably do that, had a feature for a standalone dump utility where you could just dump it to the SD card on this thing. But it had a bug where anytime I tried to do that, the flipper would just crash and reboot as soon as I clicked the go button. So that didn't work. But I did find that if I told this thing to act as an in-system programmer, where I'd plug it in via USB to my laptop, this thing was actually still able to use like the ABR dude command on Linux, which is ABR dude is like a ABR programmer software. And I believe it was I was able to use that to dump the firmware off of this device and the EEPROM. So that worked out pretty well. I can't remember which programmer it was exactly. I want to say it was the STK 500B1 was what I had to tell it was this programmer. But either way, that worked. There was another application on there that was called DAPLink, which can allow you to do SWD or JTAG. SWD, if you're not familiar with that, that's typically seen in ARM. It's serial wire debug. It's a 2-wire data connection for like data and clock that'll allow you to kind of do hardware on-chip debugging. And I was actually able to use this with OpenOCD and Linux to dump the firmware off of this little STM32 blue pill dev board that I had laying around, just connecting to the serial wire debug interface. It's pretty cool because using that, you can also real-time debug this hardware in like GDB or something like that. But that was awesome. And I'll go over that a little bit more in depth with the hardware talk. But maybe you don't want to do this with a laptop. Apparently, there's another tool, which this one was even cooler because like it was called SWD Probe. And it had support for scripts. And one of the scripts was like a flash dump. So you could literally plug this in without a computer to the device and just dump the flash memory from it. And the other thing that I liked about it was the other one had some like specific wiring for how you had to wire the SWD up. Not too big of a deal. It's 2 pins, but this one was like, yeah, just plug them in anywhere and I'll figure it out. So like you could just plug in the data and clock anywhere into like any port really, and it will just go, okay, I figured it out. You're connected, go. So I thought that was kind of cool that it would just kind of like brute force however you plugged it in to figure out how it was. But either way, I was able to run that dump STM32 script, and yeah, that little hex dump that's there confirms that, yeah, that was the firmware that I was actually expecting it to be, which was just a simple little blink LED. But continuing on, we get outside of the hardware and we get into some of the other stuff. I've done some simple like replay attacks. Like doorbell was no issue. That was what you see there in that little GIF image where I'm replaying a saved capture and it just rang the doorbell. That one was pretty easy to do. The doorbell itself uses so in the sub-gigahertz, there's two types of reads. There's read and read raw. Read is designed for if it can read a packet of a known data type that the Flipper firmware understands. In the case of this doorbell, it's Princeton 24-bit. It understood it. It was able to save that. And then it's kind of cool because if you can get a save file that way, it will just save the information on here's the frequency, here's the packet type, and here's the payload for it, and just hex bytes, and it's like a text file. This is really good because then when you go to replay that, there's no junk data. You're just generating that packet and sending it. The other one is to read raw, which is just capture this frequency and dump it to a file. And you can replay that, which is useful for being able to do replays against like, okay, Flipper firmware doesn't understand what this is. I can still replay it, but that comes at the cost of if there was background noise or anything like that, like the RF side, you're going to replay that every time you play the capture file, and it's just kind of considered a bad practice, but it's doable. So that's pretty cool. And the other thing that I liked about this is the apartment I live in, they have like DKS for the apartment, and it has like RF capabilities as well as RFID for swiping. Like if you want to get into the amenities, you would swipe your like the key fob itself, like it was a key access card or something. I was actually able to capture and store that on here, and I actually used my Flipper Zero instead of the key fob for getting into the gym or pool area. And then I was also able to verify because I've like always kind of wondered about it, but it's like, okay, you know, the old saying, trust but verify. The gate is in fact using a rolling code system. So that was actually kind of cool that I was actually able to verify that. And like using the vanilla firmware didn't allow you to save the decoded version. I think the Roguemaster will, but it's kind of risky because you can end up doing what's called a desync attack where your key fob will actually get out of sync. And you'll basically have to take it and they'll have to reprogram it. Vanilla firmware, though, I was able to do a raw capture with it when the key fob was out of range of the main gate receiver, and I was able to replay that exactly one time, and then it would work. But if somebody came up with the real key fob and did that before you replayed it, your key would actually have been invalid at that point. So, not too big of a deal. There was also some files that came in some of the firmwares and some of the collections of dumps that are online. The Tesla charge port is one of them, and we decided to try that out here because we've got a lot of people that own Teslas, and it's kind of funny because you'll just watch all of them just at once. And the range on it is surprisingly well, but like they'll automatically open up if you just send that signal out, and then they'll stay open for about a minute, and they'll just automatically close if nothing, like no charger gets plugged in. But it's kind of entertaining to watch. But yeah, it's just one of the little experiments that we did. IR, like I said, this thing can act as a TV remote, and that picture there on the right is like once you've programmed it, like because you can just point a remote at it and just click and send it a signal and be like, okay, what was that button exactly? And you can just save all these buttons to a remote, and then you'll be able to just use your Flipper Zero as a remote. So like that would be like the one from my living room TV. Also, there was a cool repo that I found online on GitHub. It was called the Flipper IRDB, where people are just dumping remotes online, and there is a massive collection of them. And you will see some really cool ones there, and there's all sorts of useful utility that you can find there. For example, like those little like marquee text LED signs. Most of those are controlled by IR, and a lot of those IR remotes are available on there. There's also for like a bunch of other things such as like CCTV systems, remote like smart vacuum cleaners that have IR control functionality and stuff like that. RGB LED lighting, like all sorts of stuff there. And then I've also played around with some of the NFC cards. I'd say probably the coolest one was 1 year at DEF CON, Raytheon had another challenge that they did, which was called Game of Pwns. It was a Game of Thrones themed CTF challenge, but you'd get a card, and the card was NFC, and you scanned it, and I was like, I never actually did this one when I was at the con. I was like, I'll play around with it later. I dumped it with this thing, and it actually turned out to be an entire 7-zip file full of challenge binaries. I'm like, man, I wish I did this at the con. So, and then like I've also tried some old hotel key cards, which I've actually had some luck with. One of the hotels though did not get cracked by the default dictionary that was on the Flipper Zero, but I was actually able to do a nested attack against the MyFair Classic, and that actually recovered the 2 missing keys. And then it was funny because like that was a cool attack because you'd use this against a card to get the data for the attack, and then you would use a Python script on your computer that would actually pull the data down, process it on your computer, and then send recovered keys back to this thing. And then you had to do a verification check where you'd put this on there and it would test those keys. And if those keys were successful, they got added to your user dictionary on your Flipper Zero. So going forward, if I ever run into, like, tried to read that hotel card again, it'll just work. So that was kind of cool. And then with that said, I'll go ahead and hand off to Jen. She had a few little examples that she wanted to kind of cover here. So take it away, Jen.
And like Travis said, we've had pretty different experiences in regards to how we use the Flipper Zero. And for me, the big reason why I was like, yeah, I want to back this. I really want to be a part of this. I liked the range of functionality that it would give me as far as specifically attempting to bypass security measures or bypassing doors. For those of you who don't know, I am a co-leader tool. It's the organization of Open Lock. I'm very passionate about opening locks if I have permission to open them. What we have here is I want to say this was last year. There was an example of a time that I was able to brute force. We can fuzz some prox readers for cards. In this case, it was a HID or an HID. And if you're coming up on one of those, just know that it's actually very uncommon to find one of those that you could successfully brute force or fuzz in the wild. Most of these have an auto lockout feature, so that if a code's attempted so many times in a row that's invalid, it'll say, okay, no more attempts for like 5 seconds. And then it'll progressively add time on top of that. So you can end up locking yourself or your coworkers out of a room for an extended period of time. So definitely exercise caution with that. And like Travis said earlier, it is possible sometimes to cause some sort of desync, in which case you are locked out if you are testing it on your own stuff. Yeah, it's a little bit of a DOS, so definitely exercise this with caution. I would also like to reiterate that every time I've done this, it has been with permission. I have specifically been asked to do that. And we made sure with the clients beforehand that if I did this, am I going to break anything? Because we don't want to actually deny anybody access to their building.
And you've also, like, if I remember correctly, we've had like clients that actually like detected this and got an alert,
yes,
letting them know, like via email, hey, somebody's trying to brute force the front door keypad.
And I thought that was really interesting because up until that point, that wasn't something that it makes sense, but
I wasn't used to seeing that. Yeah. So they are keeping an eye out for this sort of thing. So
it's also worth mentioning. Oh, what were you saying, Travis?
No, go ahead.
Oh, if you run into a system that does not have a lockout after so long, it takes this attack about 5 minutes to complete. So if you're trying to do this in broad daylight, you're going to look really suspicious. And in my case, I had to stand right up on the reader in the middle of the night, and it definitely looked very suspicious. I'm very surprised nobody called the cops on me that night. But occasionally we do get lucky. What we're seeing in this small clip right here is somebody had configured it to include some default codes. And either whenever they were setting it up, they just didn't remove it, or somebody was testing something and didn't remove those codes somehow. This is not very common. This almost never succeeds. I was surprised when it did.
This one was hilarious because the default code that actually turns the light green is all zeros.
Yes.
So,
which again, very uncommon. Almost never get to see this in the wild.
You'd be hard pressed to find a card that actually had that as its real value. So, you ready for the next slide?
Yep. So here's a much more practical use for it. What we see here on the left, we have one proximity card that is configured with a value that would get you through the door. And Travis, my assistant here, or we can pretend like I have very manly hands because he took this video for me while I was sick. What you can do is you can very easily just plop the flipper down on top of one of the cards and it will read the card for you. And then you can take that, you can get empty cards. Empty cards, I think it was like $11 for 50 of them. So we have tons of empty cards laying around. You can just copy the value for the valid card to an empty card and then use that as it's intended. So this is a much more practical use for me as somebody who does physical security assessments or penetration testing. Once I get access to the building, usually I have no issues getting it from the outside. It's not uncommon to find these badges just laying on the desk or somebody left them someplace. And if I find one of those, let's copy it. So let me see what rooms I can get into that have the key cards.
Right. And like the Flipper Zero, like you can see in this one, it will actually like save to a file. You can always actually pull the Flipper Zero out. And one of the features that it has is not just the ability to write it to another card, but it can actually just outright emulate it. And you can take this thing and scan it to a card reader as though it were a badge. An example, though, of where she would want to do this is she is now inside of the building. She does not want to sit here and try to gain access to a room with a Flipper Zero. It would look a lot more legit if she was using a legit card like everybody else does. So this is one of those, you would do this mostly for the sake of hiding in plain sight. This is a super useful attack for that sort of thing. And like I said, you can save the file and it's really quick to read a card. So in this like screen that we have here, like the card on the right is the real card. The one on the left actually has no value in it to begin with. But then we scan that card, we save it, and then we decide to use the write feature and write it to that other card. And then at that point, we can actually go to read and verify that file was actually written there, or that hex code was actually written on that RFID card. So
I think all in all, the copying and then writing to a new card took maybe 20 seconds.
Oh yeah, it's super quick.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, you also don't have to do the write operation right there. I may just read it and then save it, and then I can walk away and I can do the card somewhere else, like in the break room or bathroom or whatever. And then at that point, now I've got an ID that looks like an ID card and nothing really suspicious. I'm just pulling out my wallet and just beep, and then like that looks very like it belongs there. So that's one of the attacks that they had there. So with that said, conclusion, kind of our thoughts on this. Is the Flipper Zero better than the HackRF? They have some similar functionality. I'd argue no. The HackRF is a more versatile tool. Is it better than a Rubber Ducky? One of the guys that writes most of the Rubber Ducky scripts has literally come out and said no, because like we support the API version 1, and there's a lot of other hardware features that are now in a Rubber Ducky. Is it as good as a Proxmark 3, which is usually the thing that you'd use for attacking these card readers? No. Is it as good as those universal programmers that you'd use for all sorts of flash and like TSOP types of flash memory? No. And does it need to be better than them? No. Because again, we pointed out that the Flipper Zero is an excellent multi-tool. It's capable of doing a lot of things, and just like I have a regular multi-tool over here, it has a screwdriver, but a purpose-built screwdriver is going to be better than it. It has pliers, but purpose-built pliers will be better. Scissors, knife, etc. But what that multi-tool offers is a single package that will handle like 90% of the things that you need to run into, that you can just grab and go, and it's portable and it's nicely packaged. That is what the Flipper offers in terms of penetration testing and hacking. It is a really good tool that makes it super simple to do RF attacks. Yes, exactly. I kind of want to make a joke about a multifunction printer, but multifunction printers do a lot of things and they're bad at all of them. So, but like, yeah, it's kind of that thing. And it's like, I would actually argue that in some regards, like the HackRF is a more capable tool, but is actually harder to use than the Flipper Zero. The Flipper Zero is really good at doing quick replay, frequency analysis type stuff.
It's a lot more streamlined and a little bit more intuitive and user friendly.
Way more intuitive, because you don't even like GNU Radio Companion, never heard of it. So yeah, it's really nice in that regard. Proxmark 3, I also remember being one of those tools that kind of had a bit of a steep learning curve at the beginning. Rubber Ducky is pretty straightforward. Like Hack5 did do a really good job making that a user-friendly thing. But then like the universal programmers, those just those can range in price, and you can get like commercial ones, or you can do what I did and just get one off of AliExpress. But then you're like, okay, you got this software, you have whatever software you have there, whatever support that has, and there's a little bit of a learning curve in like 50 bazillion adapters you need to buy. Just buy them as you need them. Like don't try to front load that. So yeah. Anyways, that was kind of my take on it, and it was like, okay, but if we view this as a multi-tool, this thing is phenomenal. I found that it's providing a really good hardware platform with a really good software platform that is open. And this would make an excellent research platform to build off of. So if you ever have to do any sort of hardware hacking or things like that, you can use this as a start point. There's plenty of code examples and stuff out there. The documentation could be a little bit better with the FAP development, but it's been a while since I've checked. It might be better. But either way, the news is saying a lot of things about this thing, good, bad, and ugly. And in my opinion, who cares? Pandora's box is already opened on this matter. These exist. It doesn't matter what you think about it.
$80 million worth.
Yes.
Yeah, it's out there.
So there's a small number of these out there in the world. But in my opinion, I think that's kind of a good thing because this moves us towards actual security.
Yeah.
I've done work before in product security stuff, and like there were attacks that they were like, okay, yeah, we understand it's a risk, but like honestly, it's that guy over there that like that radio nerd that has like some custom hardware that he built that's like insanely complicated. So like really like, okay, there's risks there, but the likelihood's almost impossible, right? Like unless you're that guy. But yeah, this removes that barrier. And like this is the same thing kind of like I noticed was IoT. IoT had a lot of really bad security practices in it because the coders, their code almost never got inspected, like by attackers or like hackers and stuff, because we just didn't have the tooling. It was like back then, IDA Pro was about the only thing that was going to support some of these weird architectures, and like we didn't have a Gehedra back then or any real tools for
kind of building
doing
your own.
much. Yeah, it's like either you had some sort of toolkits for this sort of thing, or you had already been an engineer in that field and you already had like the manufacturer's toolkit for debugging these things, or you didn't have it. Eventually, we got to the point where we started building. Hey, Ropper supports ARM now. Ropper supports MIT, like so forth. And once we had the tooling for that, the barrier to entry for research lowered. And these things started like, okay, we're starting to get a really bad look here for like embedded device security. Maybe we need to step it up. So in my opinion, that leads to real security, and that's good. And in my opinion, if I remember correctly, these are about $170. I would argue it's one of the best $170 I've spent in a while. I have absolutely loved playing with this thing, and it's been very fun for research.
Certainly a lot cheaper than buying all four of those tools combined.
So
yeah,
I actually have a question about that. So
sure.
You mentioned how it isn't better than the industry best for each of those areas.
Purpose-built tools.
Right, purpose-built tools. Is there anything or any use case you can think of where it's uniquely situated because it supports a combination of features that no other tool supports? Is there? I can't really think of anything off the top of my head.
So to be honest with you, like I said with the Extreme firmware, this allows you to do rubber ducky attacks over Bluetooth. I'm not aware of any tools that do that.
I find that for physical assessment specifically, I can use it to gain entry and then also use it to compromise the computer once I'm inside. And so I'm not trying to carry around, 3 or 4 different tools and then remember where they are in my pockets or bag. And it just kind of streamlines that process and saves time whenever I'm trying not to be noticed.
Yeah. And then, like I said, like since I've gotten this thing, my old USB to your PCB has just been sitting in storage. I grabbed this before I grabbed that now. And it's like, great, now I'm going to have to update my hardware hacking presentation because it's like, there's so many tools I can just be like, if you have this thing, the Flipper Zero, you can just skip buying these hardware hacking tools. So yeah, it's really it's very impressive for that, and I'm still excited to see where this goes, to be honest, because like there's a lot of active development on these. So
Travis, are we going to be sharing the slides? I just wanted to make sure.
I don't know. How do we normally do that, Jason?
Most of these that we've done in the past, we haven't really had a slide deck. But I think in this case here, yeah, we don't have a problem with that. We'll send it out.
Okay.
There's another question in the chat as well. Have you
Yes.
also played with the Wi-Fi board?
Okay. So there is a Wi-Fi board that is available from them, and believe it or not, its intent was to be a debug board that would allow you to have a wireless connection to the Flipper Zero for connecting to it with GDB for hardware debugging. I have not played with that one. Apparently, a lot of people were buying that one and using that because they could flash the ESP Marauder firmware onto it and do some Wi-Fi attacks with it. I've not done that. Now, we recently had a all hands meeting where we all got together as a company and just kind of had a meeting. And one of the guys from out of town, me and him, been playing around with the Flipper as well. And he picked up the Mayhem board, and he actually picked up one of their PCBs. It was a bare PCB, but he's like, "You're a hardware hacker. You can source the other parts right and put it together." And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So he brought that down to me, and I just recently put it together. And that has an ESP32 cam on it, where it's the ESP32 wireless microcontroller with a little like web like camera as on it. And then the other thing that I attached to it was the NRF24, which is a Nordic chipset that's normally used for like wireless keyboards, clickers for presentations and stuff. And that can be used for attacking some of the old vulnerabilities that were in those, because like people found out that you can actually do some of them had weak implementations that would allow you to do keyboard injection, keystroke injection, or key logging. So I was meaning to get around to play with that. I tried to play around with the Marauder software, but I was like, the interface is a little confusing for me. I'll wait until I'm not like in an apartment where there's a bazillion things around me that are on Wi-Fi to make sure I'm not going to accidentally deauth somebody else's network. But yeah, I was curious to see how that goes, but I've not had a chance to play with it yet. But like, I'm more interested. I think out of all those attacks, the one that would probably be the most interesting to me from a attack from a flipper attack for Wi-Fi would probably be a deauth, because at that point a deauth is a DOS attack if you don't stop. And in my opinion, that would be useful in a small portable battery operated package. By the way, these things are incredible with battery life. I mentioned that at the beginning, but like in terms of like real world performance, like you can probably go like a month without charging this thing.
Yeah, which is good because I frequently forget to charge mine, and then I need it for something, and I'm like, oh yes, it still has battery.
Yeah, like I leave mine off to the side and like, oh man, I haven't touched it in like 2 weeks because I've been slammed, and then I'm like, oh, I still have 2/3 of my battery left.
Yeah, that really beats the monster battery you have to cart around with a hack RF.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really hard not to look suspicious with one of those.
Oh yeah, no, the hack RF absolutely looks suspicious. You like the hack RF, there was a porta-pack that was available.
Yeah.
You'd put that on, and then you got like this weird device, is like a PCB, an LCD screen there, and like a button there, and then like a giant antenna, and you're holding a battery pack for USB power to it. You'd look sketch. You'd absolutely like. But it was a very good tool for that. So, any other questions? We got about 2 minutes. All right. Well,
looks like it. So,
hand it back to Jason.
Thanks a lot, both of you, Travis and Jen, for. I think this was a very educational, first round for a lot of people. Hopefully, on understanding more about what this tool is and what it's capable of, and hopefully, some of you will get more into it and check it out. So. Again, we will send the slides out or a link to the slides sometime later this afternoon, most likely. Come and visit us at our next session.
Sounds good. Thanks for everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it.